podcast. I'm Mike Almond, and joining me is my co-host Alex Lapp. Alex, what's up, man?
Well, Mike, today we're going to talk about one of my absolute favorite decks, and we've referenced it enough on here already. I think that's what led you to want to talk a little bit more about it, and I'm certainly happy to talk about it. And that deck is the Promised Hugs, a group hug Emrakul deck.
We've referenced the Emrakul group hug deck, which, again, forgive Panic at the Disco, but walking contradiction, but not. I've seen you play this deck. It's a very good album, and it's a good deck. It's odd the first time that it hits the table, because it's one of those commanders, just like when you, no offense, when you see Nekusar across
of course.
the table.
She's a scary girl.
Narset.
There's no question about that.
It hits the table and everybody goes, oh no. And you say, no, it's okay. This is scary, but, and I've been in many of those conversations where I've heard that, no, don't worry, this isn't bad. And then turn 3, I say, you are a liar. This is not that deck. At least, not up front and immediately, because of the way you play it. And you've sent me over your deck list, which, first of all, the amount of cataloging and effort that's gone into this is, even for me, it's pretty astounding. I'm looking at all of the changes that have happened since this deck has been made, including all of the removes and what you've added for them, and categories which most people look into and say, okay, well, you know, it has this many lands, it has this much ramp, it has this much draw, and this much what the deck actually does. You go into a little bit more detail, and we'll talk about that. But what we should start with is, Alex, how does this deck work? What does this deck do?
Sure, Mike. I'd just be overjoyed to answer that question. So this is a new kind of group hug deck with a new kind of group hug commander, and that is Emrakul, the Promised End. Let's go ahead and read Emrakul. She is a 13 mana commander for 13/13, legendary creature Eldrazi. No colors, and Emrakul, the Promised End costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard. And when you cast Emrakul, the Promised End, you gain control of target opponents during that player's next turn. After that turn, that player takes an extra turn. And she has flying, trample, and protection from instants. And her flavor text says, an enigma as vexing as life itself. Now, there is another Emrakul that is banned. That's from Rise of the Eldrazi. We're not talking about that one. We're talking about the Innistrad one. Red Shadows over Innistrad.
We're not talking about the bad because it's so bad that it's banned Emrakul. We're talking about the one that it hits the table and everybody goes, oh no, that's really bad Emrakul.
Right.
But again, with some caveats, an asterisk or two. Okay. So that's Emrakul. Yeah.
She's the only commander in the game that can take control of another player. She's the only commander in a game that can grant another player an extra turn. That's 2 things that only this commander can do. So she's both a powerful political tool, right, and a horrifically deadly weapon. Now, the question that this deck offers you, its pilot, is, will your opponents receive the blessing of Emrakul's extra turns, or will they fear your wrath as you completely sunder their board state beyond any possible repair? That's really the question at the heart of this deck. So Group Hub Emrakul it's a multifaceted challenge to build and pilot. Mana fixing and colorless is really second to none, though, right? Because there's no colors. Even if you have a colorless mana pip, that's no problem. But the other side of the coin is that we really have severe restrictions on what cards we can run. We can only run colorless cards. And when I say colorless, I mean you can't run any cards with any colored mana pips anywhere on them. So if we're talking about like Bosch, Iron Golem, right? That's a red color ID card. Even though it's a artifact creature with no red in its mana cost, it has a red activated ability, so we wouldn't be able to run that. We're very, very restricted in the type of cards we can run. But if colorless had a color identity, it would be you can do anything you want, but it's going to cost you through the nose. Removal costs a lot. Card draw costs a lot. Everything costs a lot. And this leads right into the first challenge, the first red flag we're going to address here, and that is that Emrakul is 13 CMC, Mike.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of mana. Yeah,
buddy.
And
how are you getting to that point? I mean, yes, it does reduce its own cost a little bit for card types in your own graveyard, which is nice. But that feels like getting the mint on your pillow at a hotel that's costing you thousands upon thousands of dollars. Like, okay, I appreciate it, but holy cow, 13 mana.
Yeah, it's up there. I'm trying to think if there's a more expensive commander in the game. This is definitely in the top couple of most expensive commanders. So a 13 CMC commander is already expensive enough. You cast her once. But this deck wants to cast her as many times as possible during the game to continuously mindslave our opponents. So we're really spending a lot of mana in this deck. And ramp is abundant. We're going to talk about how many ramp effects we have. There's a lot. Because hard casting Emrakul is really going to be our blunt edge most of the time. You would think that we would want to try to cheat her out as much as we can. There's really not that many effects in colorless that let you cheat your commander out. But there is one that I want to bring up, and that is Geode Golem. Geode Golem came out in Commander 18, and I was so happy. I cannot believe this card isn't more popular. Geode Golem is a 5 generic mana cost artifact creature golem. It's a 5/3 with trample. Whenever Geode Golem deals combat damage to a player, you may cast your commander from the command zone without paying its mana cost. You still pay additional costs. Wow. Mike, that's the 5-finger discount right there. That is the exact kind of effect that this deck would love to have more of, but there just isn't that much of it. And we do want to keep this in mind. Even though we are casting, for example, if we were to attack a player with Geode Golem and deal combat damage and get that trigger, you still need to pay additional costs. So for every time that you've cast your commander from the command zone each game, it will cost an additional 2 generic mana, which means the second time we cast Emrakul, she'll cost 15, and the next time she'll cost 17. Now, as Mike said, and as we read off of Emrakul's card, she does reduce her own cost slightly for each card type among cards in your graveyard. So we'll get to that a little bit, but that's just a little bit of help. That's not really gonna. There's not 13 card types, right? There's only 8.
Right.
Geode Golem not only allows us to cheat out Emrakul as early as, say, turn 4, but if we have a sacrifice outlet like High Market or Mirror in the Moaning Well, both nice utility lands we'll get to, we can be mind-slaving somebody every single turn. And that's our goal. When our deck is mind-slaving somebody every turn, we're on track. Now, unfortunately, colorless is a little bit slim on tutors, right? We do have a few in here, but there's really not too many. And I even though colorless tutors are incredibly inefficient, I don't like to run too many of them because that can make the deck too consistent. And we want Geode Golem to be a nice surprise, right? When that happens, that's a very special game where we're going to have a lot of power. So the rest of the time, when we're not using our cheat out cards, we're going to use mana rocks, and we'll get to those in quite a minute. But let's go to the other part of Emrakul, the interesting part, not the cost reduction, but controlling another player. Now, this effect is not unique to Emrakul. It is unique to her as a commander, but we have a lot of different effects like that. We have Sorin, we have Mindslaver, the artifact, have quite a few different effects. But what do we do when we're controlling another player? Because we're spending all this effort to get Emrakul out on the table. She's 13 mana. We're ramping into her. We're doing everything we can to get to her. We're controlling another player. What's the plan?
Exactly,
Now,
because you're talking about a commander here that you made a very unique style of deck. It is a group hug. I'm going to take your turn. You still want to win the game somehow. I've seen you win the game with this deck. It's a powerful deck, but it's not a take the turn and immediately try and screw somebody over just because you can. Sometimes it's that, but it's much more of a political. It is group hug, but I lean toward, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. I lean much more towards this is a political deck that has group hug flavor to it.
you could argue that. I think that most of my group hug decks have a political flavor because I think the most powerful aspect of group hug, as we talked about, is its influence as a political tool that allows you to sort of meld the board in your image. But let's talk a little bit about what we can do with Emrakul's ridiculously powerful Mindslave ability. So
Please, I'm terrified.
as you alluded to, we really have two options, and we mentioned that briefly. We can effectively give completely free reign to somebody, right? We'll give them nearly complete control of their turn. Of course, they don't get to do anything that we don't want them to do, like
Right.
wipe the board or anything like that. Vandal Blast just said, no, you're not casting that. But other than that, you can just let them do whatever they want to do. Play out their turn, have a good time. Or we can just make their lives completely miserable. We can just ruin their entire day. So the first one is kind of self-explanatory, right? You say, hey, I notice you're behind on the board state.
You've missed land
Yeah.
drops.
So go ahead and
etc.
take.
Yeah.
Basically, what'll happen is they'll take a normal turn that you have full oversight over. If they try to do something you don't want them to do, you can say no, and just say, hey, you do what you want. And then after that turn ends, they're going to get an extra turn. And during that turn, they can do whatever they want. But presumably, since you've been, giving them a very expensive present, they're not going to then stab you in the back. It's possible, but it usually doesn't happen. That's kind of self-explanatory. They do what they want. What's the other side of the coin? Making their lives miserable, wrecking their entire day. What does that mean when I say that? So my favorite trick is to sacrifice, destroy, exile, tuck their commander, and then choose not to return it to the command zone.
Yeah.
That is the number one day ruining, just spit in your food, mean boy, rudest thing you can do. And boy, howdy, Mike, it is extremely effective. It wrecks people. So yes, we are allowed to make this choice because when we control another player, we can make any decisions that they would make. And against many decks, this is devastating. In a previous episode, we talked a bit about trying to make sure that your deck can run without your commander.
Function.
Yeah, exactly. That's an excellent tip. A lot of people, Mike, they don't follow that tip. I don't really follow that tip. But
well, actually, do you know what prompted me to give out that advice?
That?
So there's this one time I was sitting across the table from somebody who was playing an Emrakul, the Promised End deck.
Oh, was it me?
It was you.
My.
And I was playing the Azuri Renegade. The Claw of Progress.
Yeah, we got to lock
commander.
that sucker down.
I think I got both sides of the coin in that same game.
Yeah.
I missed a couple of land drops.
Like, here, Mike, have a presence.
Yeah, and you got me there to where my next card that I drew was a Cultivate, and I played that out, and then the turn after that, I did scary stuff. And you went, oh no, that doesn't get to happen anymore. Emrakul came back and, did the, hey, let me just hug your head a little bit. And you did. And the first time, it was a nice, soothing caress. It's okay, buddy. Everything's going to be fine. We're going to give you another turn, find some lands. Good job. And then the second time, it started hugging me, and I was like, oh, this is nice. This is a little bit tighter than I'm being... Okay, cool. Oh, wow, we've killed Azuri, and now he is in my graveyard. That's... Well, he's kind of important to make the deck go.
You can... Because the thing you need to remember when you're controlling another player is that you can still cast instant speed spells and activate instant speed abilities on your board. So, for example, if you had a Swords to Plowshares, you could Swords their commander at instant speed, and then, as you are controlling the other player, choose to keep their commander in exile permanently, and they are never getting that thing back. So Mike really enumerated on just how powerful and unique an experience it is to be judged by this strange and uncaring god. The Promised End. It can lift you up to the highest highs, and it can just sweep your legs out from under you and then crush your skull. It can really go either way. And as you said, and as we were just talking about, a lot of decks, too many probably, are completely dependent upon their commander. They think, okay, it's only a 3 CMC, 4 CMC, 5 CMC commander. Even if it gets knocked out twice, I can still get it back. They're not prepared for a commander being permanently removed from the game, or effectively permanently. Now, putting the commander in the graveyard, yes, if they have a Bojuka Bog, if they have Rest in Peace, they can exile their own graveyard and get it back to the command zone. That can happen. You don't want to have to rely on that. So that's the meanest thing we can do. And we do, if we really need to shut someone down hard, we can do that. But we don't have to do that. There are other things we can do.
We don't have to do that. It's mean when we do that. It's fun when we do that.
It's very fun.
Let's be honest.
It's incredibly fun.
There's very few strategies that your commander's going to go away work well with. It's kind of intense, but it makes for a very fun political game to be playing inside the game, and that's part of why I was so excited to talk about this deck and have you talk to our listeners about it.
Absolutely.
So why don't we get into some of the things? Because again, it's a 13 mana card. It has these ridiculously powerful effects, and you want to be able to cast it multiple times. Like you said, that's the blunt edge. Not necessarily cheating it out, but getting it out there as much as possible. So why don't we lean into some of the ways that you're able to make that happen?
Sure. So we already talked about Geode Golem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Geode Golem, fantastic, great card. We're not always going to be able to get that card. We want to have some other tools that will allow us to get the commander out. And part of getting the commander out is not just ramp, which we will get to. It's also getting Emrakul off the board so that we can cast her again, right? Mm-hmm. So that would require sacrifice outlets, and we do have a couple of those. We have High Market. And High Market is a land that tap to add a colorless and tap to sack a creature. You gain 1 life. Great land. We also have Mirror in the Moaning Well, which is a legendary land with tap, add colorless to your mana pool, and pay 3 tap and sacrifice a creature. You gain life equal to the sacrifice creature's toughness. Now, life gain isn't, in a deck that isn't a life gain deck, typically isn't desirable, but 3 mana gain 13 life and also sack your commander.
Right, which wants to be sacked.
It's a pretty good effect. Yeah. 13
I think
life.
the return on investment there is okay.
Oh, for sure. We have a couple of other options as well. We have Trading Post, great artifact. Let's talk about all the different things that Trading Post can do. Trading Post is a 4 mana artifact with 4 different activated abilities. The first one is pay 1 and tap and discard a card. You gain 4 life. The second one is the one I just use all the time when I'm dirtling, which is great. Pay 1, tap it, and pay a life. Create a 0/1 white goat creature token. That is a great effect. Just on any turn where you're not using any of the other abilities, just make a blocker. Yeah, make a blocker, no problem at all. The third ability is pay 1, tap, and sacrifice a creature. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. This is the big one. This is the one that I'll use if I need to sacrifice Emrakul or another one of my creatures. And then as a bonus, I'm recurring an artifact, which, as we'll get to, this deck is largely artifacts. Like it's like half artifacts.
Well, that's what happens when you have colorless and need as much ramp as
Yeah,
possible. That's reliable, so it's understandable at the very least.
exactly. The final ability is pay one tap and sacrifice an artifact, draw a card. This is nice if somebody's trying to steal one of your artifacts, or somebody's wiping the board anyway. Just gotta sacrifice it so it doesn't get exiled or what have you. Trading Post is just it's good value. It has a lot of different options for things that you can do. I would say it's solid in any artifact deck, but it's definitely solid in this
Oh,
deck
for sure.
because, as we said, we want to be able to sacrifice Emrakul at instant speed, just for any eventuality, right? And we have a couple more options, right? We can, instead of sacrificing Emrakul, we could bounce her, and that actually has its own benefits because when you bounce a commander to your hand, and then you want to hardcast her again, you don't have to pay the additional command tax. You only pay the listed number, which is then, of course, discounted from her ability. So we have a couple of things that can do that. We have a card called Erratic Portal, which is a 4-mana artifact that has 1 and tap, and it says return target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1. We're not going to pay the 1, Mike.
No.
We're not going to pay the 1. Now this does, if somebody's tapped out, you can like bounce their commander. That's nice. Usually I use it to bounce Emrakul, cast her again, that kind of stuff. And then we also have Sanctum of Eternity, which came out last year, which is a land that says tap, add a colorless, and it has another ability, pay 2 and tap, return target commander you own from the battlefield to your hand, activate this ability only during your turn. This is great. If you have a commander that is important to you, and it's important to your deck, you want to have ways to make sure that you retain control of it. Because if somebody steals your commander, it is very, very hard for you to get it back. Because you can't sacrifice it anymore. You can't destroy it anymore. I mean, it's going to be a lot harder to get it back. You're going to have to spot remove it or wipe the board. But if you have one of these options available to you, a bounce, a sacrifice outlet, you can retain control of your commander. And for this deck, that's very important. And for many decks, that's very important. We have one more. Mirage Mirror. It's a jack of all trades.
Yeah.
Mirage Mirror is just a great, great artifact. It's 3-mana artifacts. It has the activated ability, pay 2. Mirage Mirror becomes a copy of target artifact, creature, enchantment, or land until end of turn. Yeah, that's a clone effect that lasts for 1 turn. It's fantastic, and great part about that is you can have Mirage Mirror become a copy of Emrakul the Promised End, and then when the Legend rule takes effect, you sacrifice the OG Emrakul and put her in the command zone. So that's how we're working with Emrakul to Mindslave. Mike, what aspect of the deck do you think we should go with next year?
So we're talking a little bit as far as the mind slaving and the way that you're making it happen, which is good because, again, that's the idea of the deck. I think with us keying in on the fact that Emrakul is 13 mana and does get a little bit of a cost reduction built into the card. This is, again, it's a colorless deck. There is a ton of ramp necessary to actually make the deck wheel and deal and get Emrakul out there as many times as possible. So why don't we go through some of that ramp, because some of these cards are the standards that everybody knows about. Yeah. And then there's a lot more that I don't think people consider nearly as often as they should.
Absolutely. We do have a lot of standard ones. We have our Soul Ring. We have our Mana Crypt. We don't really have to go over those. Mox Opal. These are the very standard high power ramp pieces that you would expect to see in a deck that's trying to go very fast. We're not really going to get into those. We're going to talk about some of the more strange ramp pieces that you may not have seen or played with before. Let's start with Blinkmoth Urn. This is one of my favorite cards, Mike. This is a 5-mana artifact that says at the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, if Blinkmoth Urn is untapped, that player adds colorless to their mana pool for each artifact they control. Wow. So this deck, as again you'll see, it has over 50 artifacts in it.
Yep.
And this isn't just raw value for me, and it is incredible value. This is a mana donation effect, and this is a political group hug style deck. If there's somebody else at the table with some mana rocks out, suddenly those mana rocks are giving even more mana because they're adding free mana to their mana pool every turn. This is a fantastic group hug effect. It's a little bit difficult to justify in most decks, Mike, because it's a 5 mana artifact, and when it comes out, nothing happens. Right? That's kind of a feel bad, and then it goes around the table. Everybody else gets to use it before you do. But if it comes back to you, and you get to untap with it, I mean, the sky's the limit. You can make so much mana off this bad boy, and Mirage Mirror is perfect for this card.
Yeah. And the other thing going with that is, it is a symmetrical effect, but symmetrical with air quotes, because the way that you have built this deck, with you having 50 artifacts, means that you are in a position to take care of yourself way better with this card than anybody else is. They can expect it, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be on the same level to actually get as much use or as much mana out of it.
Oh, yeah.
More importantly, this is one of those symmetric effects that you have the capability of turning off. Most don't. And I there have been several times where I've seen you play this card and go, well,
none for you.
Looking at the current board state, I'm going to get 1 colorless mana on my turn. And if that survives until his next turn, he is looking at 27 mana. Cool. I am sure that that's not going to be a bad thing in any way, shape, or form.
Hey, with that much mana, we can cast my commander 2 times.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, it's great. Let's get to the next interesting ramp card here. Clock of Omens. This is a 4 mana artifact, and this is a real sleeper, you guys. When I was not originally running this card, this is one of those cards that I put in, and I was surprised. It says, tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, untap target artifact. Now, I saw that, and I'm like, I mean, sure, that's good. You're untapping artifacts, but, you're never going to break even because you have to untap, tap 2 untapped artifacts. No. This card is bonkers powerful.
Bonkers, yep.
Oh, it's so strong. As we'll go through, this card included, many of my artifacts do not need to be tapped to make mana or to do what I need them to do. So this card right here is one of those 2 cards that you can tap to untap a mana rock or anything else that I need to untap. It's quite great. And also, it says untap target artifact, not target artifact you control. So this can be used to donate mana to another player or untap one of their artifact creatures so they can use it as a blocker at instant speed. There's a lot of different things you can do with this card. And again, I wasn't originally convinced that this card was worth running, but I put it in just to see how it played, and it completely blew me out of the water, Mike. Let's move to the next card, which people may be familiar with, but this card is not very common from what I've seen, and that's Doubling Cube, which is a 2 mana artifact, and it has an activated ability, pay 3 and tap it, double the amount of each type of mana in your mana pool. Now, that sounds bonkers, and this card is very expensive. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it just hasn't been reprinted in a while, but it sounds a lot stronger than it is for most decks, right? Because let's crunch the numbers on this. You would need 7 mana in your mana pool to generate mana from that ability, because you're paying 3, and if you have 6 mana, for example, you're paying 3, it'll take you down to 3, then you double, that takes you back up to 6. So at 6 mana, you're breaking even. At 7 mana, you're generating mana. Pay 3, now you're at 4, that'll take you up to 8. But with this deck, we're generating so much mana, and we need to get to these higher echelons of mana, get up to 13. This can get you from 9 to 13, and that's a big jump. Our next one here is Forsaken Monument. This one's brand new. This just came out in Zendikar. Forsaken Monument is a 5-mana legendary artifact that says colorless creatures you control get +2/+2. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless mana, add an additional colorless mana. And whenever you cast a colorless spell, you gain 2 life. I don't really care about the other 2. I care about the middle one. And it's a great effect because tapping a permanent, that means all of my utility lands, which we'll get to later on, they all tap for more than 1 mana. All of my mana rocks are tapping for more mana because they all tap for colorless. This card is fantastic. It's a lot of value.
This deck is really good about making you do the uncomfortable smile, like at the Simpsons meme of being on the bus. I'm in danger. that every time that we're talking about cards in this, I'm both excited and just like, maybe it'll be fine. I love the amount of ambiguity this deck has.
Our next card is a group hug staple, but maybe some of you who aren't in group hug metas haven't seen this one. Gropper Orrery.
Yeah,
this is a 4-mana artifact, and boy, group hug decks just love this one. Each player may play an additional land on each of their turns. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, that player draws 3 cards. Just value. That's an extra land each turn. That's ramp. And Mike, it's hard to draw cards in colorless. I have a lot of card draw in this deck, and frequently you get that problem in your ramp deck. Green players know exactly what I'm talking about. You have so much ramp and so much value, you just cast, you vomit your entire hand onto the battlefield. Whoopsie daisy, you have no cards in hand, you can't do anything. This is a nice effect because beginning of your upkeep, draw 3 cards, and then draw a card in your draw step. You have 0 cards in hand. At the start of your turn, now you have 4 in hand. And that has triggered for me multiple times. It's pretty fantastic.
I've seen you use the trading post ability to discard a card to get to no cards in hand.
I have
to draw 3 cards. And I just went, well, that makes me uncomfortable. But okay, fine.
Yeah. Here's another great one. This one is actually sees quite a bit of play in competitive EDH, but this is a bit of a group hug staple for me personally. Helm of Awakening. This is a 2-mana artifact. All spells cost 1 less to cast. So, yeah, that's all spells. That's all of my spells. All my mana rocks cost 1 less. There's no limit on that. If they're a 1-drop, they can cost 0. And for everybody else at the table, it's making their spells cheaper too. Now, in a competitive deck, this is allowing you to race out all your 1-mana rocks are now 0-mana rocks and just win the game on the spot. But in this deck, it's much more, hey, everybody, 5% off on me, free domestic drinks only. It's a pretty great effect. I like it.
It's Helm of Happy Hour.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, double appetizers, cheese sticks on the house. This is quite an interesting one. Inspiring Statuary. This is from Aether Revolt. It's a 3-mana artifact. Non-artifact spells you cast have Improvise. What is Improvise? Improvise is your artifacts can help you cast this spell. Each artifact you tap after activating mana abilities pays for 1. So, there's not that many non-artifact spells in this deck. There is one that I can think of. The lady herself up top. The fact of the matter is that in this artifact deck, there are a lot of mana rocks. There are also a lot of non-mana rock artifacts. We were looking at Clock of Omens and talking about this. With this card, Inspiring Statuary, literally every single one of my 50-plus artifacts is now a mana rock to cast my commander with. Which is... wow.
It's a lot of extra... It's a lot of extra mana for
3 mana.
A 3-mana artifact.
Plus it can turn off symmetrical effects like Blink of a Turn.
Yeah, that was the other part I wanted to get
to.
and it stops some other things. This is actually a card I wish I saw more of. In my Equipment Auras deck, it's in there, and it's That's to cast the commander like yours is, which isn't a 13 generic cost one. So it's in decks that I have that are less efficient with the way that it's used, and I'm still happy it's in there. In this deck, it is key. It is
Oh yeah, it's a
awesome, and
monster.
it is. Oh,
Oh
good
yeah.
lord!
Our next one here is one that might be familiar to some of our competitive players, some modern players. That's Krark Clan Ironworks. That's a
Yeah,
4 mana artifact with the ability to sacrifice an artifact, add 2 colorless to your mana pool. In the competitive circuit, this is part of a 4 artifact combo that basically allows you to net infinite mana or draw infinite cards. And the combo itself is quite fantastic and quite complicated. I do not have that combo in this deck. However, as any EDH player knows, having a sack outlet is powerful, and having a sack outlet that nets you value, I would compare this directly to Ashnod's Altar. I have sacrificed most of my board to cast my commander before. This is great value even when you're not going infinite with it, which I choose not to. I'll briefly touch on Manifold Key, which is a modified Voltaic Key. Now, Voltaic Key we all know is pay 1 and tap, untap target artifact, and that has combo potential. Vintage decks love it. This one's a little bit different. It can't untap itself. It says pay 1 and tap, untap another target artifact. But it also has a second ability, which is pretty fantastic for this deck. Pay 3 and tap. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. Yeah. We haven't really touched on this too much, but the win con of this deck is swinging through with Emrakul and winning with commander damage, which is a very effective way to win when your commander is a 13/13. I'll tell you that. That's a 2-turn clock is what that is.
it don't hurt at the very least. I mean, it hurts to get hit by, but as far as it's a 13/13 with other abilities and some protection built into it, and the ability for me to recast it pretty easily, even though it's a 13/13 for 13. Cool. Thanks, Alex.
I will
appreciate it.
frequently attack with her, deal 13, then sacrifice her and recast her to Mindslave that player. That's a common occurrence.
Anybody listening, the shudder that you just felt go down your spine is normal. It's okay. You don't need to see a doctor for that yet. But we'll see depending on how the rest of this episode goes.
Okay.
Manifold Key is awesome. Emrakul is awesome.
Absolutely
what else we got?
Fantastic.
Oh boy, here we go. I don't like the robot with. It looks like it has angry eyes to me. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm just jaded at this point because the amount of times it's hit the table and I've immediately thought, oh, the game's over. Why don't we talk about Metalworker and how extremely powerful it is, both in general and especially this deck?
Metalworker. This card actually used to be banned in Commander. Not a lot of people remember that. But Mike, I wonder why they would want to ban this card. Such a great card. Metalworker is a 3-mana artifact creature construct. It's a 1/2. And it has the activated ability that it's the best activated ability. Tap, reveal any number of artifact cards in your hand, and add 2 colorless mana for each artifact revealed this way. Oh my god. This card... If I ramp into this card, play a Mana Crypt, play this on turn 1, and then turn 2, tap him, reveal 6 artifacts in my hand, and cast my commander turn 2, I've done it before. And people start shifting in their seats a little bit.
That's a really, really polite way for you to say scoop at instant speed.
Yeah,
but yes,
no,
got it.
This is why I don't run a lot of tutors in the deck, because this combo Mike would be so oppressive. I would just get it every time and win every time, right? So this is always a happy accident when this happens. Typically, it's obviously happening later in the game. Now, this card is very, very expensive. This is a $120 card. I have the gold
I
border
think
here,
even
and
I was gonna say even the gold border is like $30
yeah, the
or
gold
something
border's
like that
really
at this
jumping
point, isn't
up.
it?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a very good card. Like it's understandable.
the value is just right
it,
off the charts. It's
plus then you include the ability that there's a lot of cards in your deck that like untapping artifacts.
oh yeah, oh yeah.
And there's nothing worse than when a Mirage Mirror turns into a Metal Worker and you're just, oh, okay, cool. So that's all of the mana. I did the math. He has all of the mana. Ugh. I don't like Weird Wally, but holy cow.
If Geode Golem is my bro, this is, I would say this is my other bro, or my grandson, whatever you want to call it.
You're Belbay.
This is my bae.
Metalworker is awesome.
Metalworker is one of the best cards in this entire deck, and if you're running an artifact deck that's running 30 or more artifacts, you should probably be running this card. Now, I know it's very expensive, but, just proxy it. It's not a big deal. A couple of more. Victory Chimes. Victory Chimes is a 3-mana artifact that says, untap Victory Chimes during each other player's untap step. And then it says, tap a player of your choice adds a colorless mana.
Mm-hmm.
This is exactly what I want to be doing. It's a mana rock that untaps itself, which is great.
Which is always nice.
Every turn. And it can give me mana every turn. It can donate mana every turn. Can you think about how many times you've been playing the game and somebody across from you is like, oh man, if only I had one more mana, I could do this thing I'm trying to do. You're like,
right.
Hey buddy, I can make that happen for you. Let's talk.
Yeah.
What can we make happen? And that's the political angle I love. The last ramp effect we're going to talk about that isn't a land, because we have plenty of ramp lands, is Walking Atlas.
Yeah!
Now, Walking Atlas is one of my favorite cards. I am shocked that this card does not see more play outside of green decks. It's a 2-mana artifact creature construct. It's a 1/1, and it says, tap, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, green has that effect. Green has no problem doing that at instant speed.
No,
what about
literally
any other color?
Yeah, about that.
And this isn't just for ramping. This is for shenanigans. Mike, have you ever tapped to put out a Glacial Chasm at instant speed?
I haven't tapped to put out a Glacial Chasm at instant speed. We'll get to it a little bit later. I have not had a more fun moment on somebody else's combat step than Walking Atlasing out a Maze of Ith.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it feels so good. Little peek behind the curtain. It's a great card. We were actually talking about what cards should we do for our lesser known cards, and Walking Atlas, it is an awesome card, and I think you pointed out, and I agree with you, that it is a well-ish known card. That people just don't play.
It's in
enough.
What is it? 6,000 deck? 4,000 decks?
About 4,000.
Okay, 4,000. But that's not enough decks.
It's not enough. So this is our mini. this is our mini podcast inside of a podcast. Walking Atlas is super cool. You should use it more often, especially if you're not playing green. Ding. All right, moving on. Walking Atlas is great. All right, so Alex, this is how we get out our commander pretty consistently. This is how we sacrifice it to get it back out there. This is what the Mindslaver effects are and how we're able to repeat them. How are you keeping a full hand in this deck? We talked about the gear per orrery, but that's one of those things that has to have a very, very certain win, or a very, very certain effect going on for you to refill your hand. So how are you keeping things in your hand to be able to keep going with this deck?
Yeah, that's the funny thing, Mike. Even though there's about 30 effects in the deck that you could call card advantage, keeping your hand full in a colorless deck is surprisingly difficult. So let's go through some of the things that we need to stoop to keep our hand full in a colorless deck. Let's start with Endbringer. This is one of the few Eldrazi I have in the deck. This is a 5 and a colorless for an Eldrazi creature 5/5, untap Endbringer during each other player's untap step. And then Endbringer has 3 activated abilities. The first one is tap. Endbringer deals 1 damage to target creature or player. The second one is pay a colorless and tap. Target creature can't attack or block this turn. And the third one, the money one, is pay colorless, tap, draw a card. I think you'll find that in a colorless deck, if you're paying 2 mana for a card, it's a steal. That's the least amount you will ever pay for a card in colorless. And the fact that you can do it every turn, I mean, this is where things like where Victory Chimes comes into play, Mike, because with Victory Chimes you can be drawing a card for 1 mana 4 times during a turn. You can be locking down people's attackers and blockers. You can be pinging stuff. Endbringer's a good value creature, and I think people just overlook it because you need so much colorless mana to use it. But this card has a lot of value on it.
It does. And I like cards that say it's this much for this thing. By the way, here are the 3, 4, 5, 6 different things that you can do with it. Big fan. Targeted effects are great. Any kind of untapped shenanigans, big fan of. This card has a lot of adaptability to the actual board state.
For sure.
Which is fantastic. And I don't understand, just for the name Endbringer, people should use this card more often. It just sounds cool.
And it's dirt cheap. It's like a $2 card.
It is. It's very good in this deck. What else are we dealing with in card advantage? Because you said it, and I'm looking at it. There's 30 plus cards here to get you where you need to go.
You'd think that we would have no problem, right? You'd think that it would be easy. You have 30 cards. It's not easy. You really have to plumb the depths here. The next one is a group hug staple, Fonts of Mythos.
Woohoo!
What a great group hug card. This is a 4 mana artifact. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws 2 cards. So that's, for those who are counting at home, that's 3 cards. As you draw.
That's bigger Howling Mind. Yeah.
This is super Howling Mind. Yeah. It's kind of funny that the theme of this card is like pain and punishment when this is one of the most powerful group hug draw effects in the game.
Right.
Like, those who drink from Malphagor's cup are tainted with hunger and stained with lies. That might be true like later on, but right now I'm just giving you like a bunch of free cards. I don't know why you're complaining.
Yeah, for the time being, it's pretty great.
Yeah.
You're not punishing me for having extra cards. I don't understand the concern here, but okay.
I will say if that's Malphagor's cup, it's pretty spiky. I don't know if I would want to drink directly from that, but I would like pour it into a nicer cup and then drink from that cup.
Or do the awkward thing where like you hold the cup higher away
like
from you so you don't make direct contact.
No, I'm never able to pull that off. I'll just pour it on my face. I have a drinking problem.
No, fair
enough. Okay, so we talked about Garroper Orrery. How about Horn of Greed, another group hug staple?
Yep.
Horn of Greed, 3 mana artifact. Whenever a player plays a land, that player draws a card. Yeah, this deck can play lands. It has enough lands, and we also have other effects like Garroper Orrery. You can play an additional land, and when you play that land, you draw another card. Now, keep in mind, this does not work when you put a land onto the battlefield.
It's not landfall.
Right. But this is good group hug value. I like it. And you are immediately replacing that land with another card, which is good value.
No, it's very specific that we point out here in the actual column itself. We are talking about card advantage. Some of these are full-fledged. It's just card draw. But some of them are more on replacement and everything along those lines. Horn of Greed, yes, it's just straight up card draw on effect. So it's very good. And again, there's so many more. There's so many more.
Oh, there's so many more. Let's move to one of the rare tutor effects in the deck, which is Kuldaltha Forge Master. Now,
Alex, I'm offended.
You're offended that I have, what, 2 tutor effects in the entire deck?
2? Good lord, it's even worse than I
Oh my
thought.
gosh. Well, the other one's even harder to use than this one, so.
All right, fine.
Kuldotha the Forge
Go
Master is
ahead.
a 5-mana artifact creature construct. It's a 3/5. It has the activated ability tap, sacrifice 3 artifacts, search your library for an artifact card, and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Yeah, so sacrificing 3 artifacts, that can include itself, and usually it does, because I don't want to leave this on a board as a threat. I'll get the thing that I want, and I'll sacrifice this. And there's not that much recursion in this deck, so that usually calms people down a bit. But I'm probably going to find Geode Golem, and if I already have Geode Golem, I'm probably going to find Metal Worker. That's why I don't have very many of these effects, because the things that I can find are so strong that it's almost unfair that I can find them. The next one we have here is one that a lot of people pretty much just brush right off, right? Because it just doesn't seem good enough for most decks, but it's good enough for this deck, and that's Mind's Eye. Mind's Eye is a 5-mana artifact that says whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1 if you do draw a card. Now, I think that most decks would pretty much rather run just about anything before they would run this. But white decks, mono white decks, and colorless decks, especially if you're of the group hug persuasion and you're making other people draw cards, 1 mana to draw a card is, I mean, I said earlier that 2 mana is the best rate you're going to get. How about 1 mana? That's quite fantastic. I'm ready and willing to pay 1 mana, and again, I'm going to go back to Victory Chimes, which makes it 0 mana once a turn. It's good, but in green, blue, black, and maybe even red,
there's just more efficient ways to do it. Yeah, because I get that, because you get into it's not 1 mana to draw a card or 0 mana when you do that. It's 6 mana to draw 1. Mm-hmm. It's 7 mana to draw 2, et cetera, and how much do you have to put
let's be honest, though. No one's
work?
removing this, and you're going to draw a lot of cards off of this. No one's touching this thing like, oh my god, we got to get rid of that Mind's Eye. No one has ever said those words.
That's not inherently true. Somebody has said those words, okay, but it's after Mind's Eye has drawn 25 cards in a pretty short amount of time.
At that point, we're drawing 25 for 30, which is pretty much as good as you can get. Tamiyo's Journal is a 5-mana artifact, legendary artifact, that says at the beginning of your upkeep, investigate. And that means you put a colorless clue artifact token onto the battlefield, and it has the ability pay 2 and sack it, draw a card. I'm happy to do that, number one, because there are cards in my deck that care about artifacts, and I can tap these artifacts to ramp and then sack them for mana, or sack them for drawing a card. Clues are just good value in this deck, but the big money is the activated ability, which is tap and sacrifice 3 clues, search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Now that's a great effect, but it's really hard to get to, because that takes 4 turns after you played a 5-mana card. It's the current turn and then 3 additional turns, and then you have to hardcast it. So as far as tutors go, this is probably one of the weakest ones in the game. However, while it's not tutoring, it's still generating value.
I mean, this deck cares about there being more artifacts out onto the battlefield. It cares about effects that allow you to draw cards. It cares about the journal being an artifact in its own right. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is not a super efficient or crazy powerful card in a vacuum. It synergizes really well with what you're trying to do with this deck.
Our next card here in the card event
I do like this one.
Tome of Legends. Tome of Legends is a 2-mana artifact that says Tome of Legends enters the battlefield with a page counter on it whenever your commander enters the battlefield or attacks, which, may I remind you, is something that is going to be happening pretty often in this deck. Put a page counter on Tome of Legends. and then you can pay 1, tap, and remove a page counter and draw a card. I cast my commander a lot in this deck, and I attack with her a lot. So getting page counters on this artifact is not a problem. And being able to draw a card for 1 mana is not a problem at all. I'm happy to do that. For more aggressive decks, like if you have a white or red, maybe a Voltron deck or an attacking deck where your commander is an attacking creature, this is some excellent value. I think it really got overlooked.
Yeah,
this came out in front of Eldraine.
I don't know why either, because it's not such a strict. It's not a restriction to where people wouldn't be able to get benefit off of it fairly easily. It's not an expensive card. It's not an expensive cost and mana ability to draw a card, and you cast your commander, you attack with your commander a good portion of the time. Not just you, just like commanders, a lot of them attack, and it comes with a page counter. I don't understand why this wasn't a
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat is 3 mana draw a card, which in white and colorless, yeah, I'll pay 3 mana for a card. Let's move on to another group hug staple, and that's Temple Bell.
Bong.
Temple Bell's a 3 mana artifact. Tap. Each player draws a card. Classic.
Real simple.
I think I have this in just about every group hug deck that it would be appropriate to play it in.
Sure.
It's just easy value. You can tap it whenever you want to draw the card. For example, on your opponent's end step before your turn begins. Or if a player is, digging for something they need, and you say, hey, take another card. The fact that it's a 0 mana card draw effect is something that you would only see in colorless if it were a group hug effect. And that's some of the value of group hug that we've been talking about. I was talking about how I'll pay 3 mana for a card. I'll happily pay 2, and if I'm paying 1, I'm ecstatic. How about paying 0?
Not a whole lot of pushback
no kidding.
On that. And again, a lot of that is our overall disposition for group hug, and much more of it is our overall disposition on I'm okay with helping everybody if I'm able to take advantage of it better than they can. And it's
a little risque. So we have one more.
Yes.
And that's Will of Knowledge. This is a deep cut. Will of Knowledge is a 3 mana artifact that says on each player's draw step, that player may pay 2 any number of times and then draw that many cards. When you're starting your turn and you have no plan because you have very few cards in hand or no cards in hand, I am happy to start to fill up my hand with 2 or 3 cards, pay 4 or 6 mana. Other people are too. You want to draw an extra card, pay 2 mana. People don't tend to partake of this very much, but then later on in their turn, they wish they had. It just requires a little bit of a head planning. Have you played this card before, Mike?
I haven't. And frankly, I think it's because So most of the time when I'm doing big mana, and I think that this qualifies as a big mana deck. When I do big mana, I don't usually have to worry about card draw because my big mana decks aren't colorless. They're almost always including a good amount of green and a couple of other effects that say, okay, I'm just going to have as much mana as possible. And if I'm doing that, green has gotten a lot better at including a whole lot of card draw. So if I'm doing that on my own, I never really have to worry about it. However, I really like this card in the political and group hug sense. So it is something that I'm going to have to involve in a bunch of decks. Now just looking at it again and being confronted with the fact that
people don't really know about this one.
Yeah, it's a good card. I've seen it, and it's one of those things that I don't have running enough, so I think it just slipped my mind on how fun it would be to put into a.
So that wraps up our card advantage category, Mike.
We're going to take a quick break here, and we're going to talk about the rest of the actual set in this deck. We're going to talk about a few more of the group hug type effects. We're going to talk about how you protect yourself. And I mean, we're going to get into the vegetables, but we've still got plenty of dessert for everybody. So we will be right back. Hey, it's Present Mike filling in for Past Mike. Our audio has gotten so much better. Thanks for sticking around with us. So we're going to talk about some cards that are really underplayed. We each think that we're bringing some really interesting cards to the table, and if you want to grab them or any other cards, you can help us out in the process. We have partnered with tcgplayer.com, so if you're looking for any singles, sealed product, deck boxes, sleeves, playmats, really anything to spice up your game experience, go to bit.ly/EDHsocial or click on the link in our show notes. You don't pay anything extra, and you'll really help us out by buying all the things you were going to anyway. That's bit.ly/EDHsocial or click the link in our show notes. Back to the show. All right, we are back, and we're going to talk about the vegetables. Because, you know what? Those are important. They help you grow. Emrakul, very big girl. She needs her vegetables so she can stay nice and strong. Alex, talk to me about some of the lands in this deck.
Sure, Mike. If you're looking at the deck list, one of the first things you would notice is just how many lands are in the deck.
Yep.
Not by sheer number, because there's 36. But typically when you're looking at a list of lands, that list is pretty short because you have a lot of duplicates. You got some basics of each different color that you're running. We don't have any colors in this deck. So we have 4 basics. We're running 4 wastes. And those are kind of a bit of vestigial from back when this deck had more put basics into play, but it's still good to have basics just in case. So we have four wastes. That's a basic land that taps for a colorless. But let's get to the real juicy stuff, because that means there are 32 utility lands in this deck. Now that's a privilege that is ill afforded to any deck with colors in it, because you have to have your fixing. But in this deck, in a colorless
there is no fixing.
The sky's the limit. You can put in all of your favorite utility lands, and indeed I have. Let's talk about a couple of those. First, we have Bazaar of Baghdad, which I've proxied because this card is $3,000.
Yeah, it's a little expensive.
Bazaar of Baghdad is one of these spell lands we're talking about, right? We don't count that as one of our lands because it doesn't tap for mana, and basically it says draw 2, discard 3. Which you're going -1 on cards, but in this deck, just being able to get more cards into your hand is worth that value. I'm not telling anybody to go out and buy Bazaar of Baghdad. You're probably going to go broke trying. It's incredibly expensive, hope not. But this is a proxy. So
yeah, it happens. I don't think anybody gets to give you a hard time for not having the looking it up on TCG Player $1,700 card.
Okay, there you go, $1,700. Yeah, that's quite expensive. Here's another one that was released relatively recently. Blast Zone. Blast Zone is a land that enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it. You can tap and add a colorless. It has the activated ability pay XX, tap, put X charge counters on Blast Zone, and then the ability pay 3 and sacrifice it and tap. Destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Blast Zone. So removal in colorless is very sparse. This is a very slow but deliberate way to get rid of something. And I haven't used it very often, but if there's something that needs to be getting rid of, this is one of the few ways you can do it. And it's on a land, so it's very nice. We have Buried Ruin here for some nice recursion. You can get an artifact card back to your hand. Cavern of Souls. People know this one. It's usually only in tribal decks. When Cavern of Souls enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, tap and add a colorless. Tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend it only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, and that spell cannot be countered. So I'm choosing Eldrazi, even though Emrakul is basically the only one, just so Emrakul can't be countered. And the interesting thing about countering Emrakul is that when you counter Emrakul, you're still getting Mind Slaved, Mike, because that's a cast trigger. And if you stifle the cast trigger, you're still getting the 13/13 body. So it's really, really difficult to deal with Emrakul with counter magic. And this makes it even harder. We've got Deserted Temple, which is a nice one here. You can pay 1 and tap to untap target land. We have several lands here that make more than 1 mana, so that's a nice untapping effect. Eldrazi Temple, of course. You can add 2 mana, spend it only on Eldrazi. Emergence Zone, you can pay 1 tap and sacrifice it to cast spells as though they have flash. Just a nice one-off effect there. Eye of Ugin is an interesting legendary land. It says colorless Eldrazi spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. And then it has an activated ability, pay 7, tap it, and search your library for a colorless creature card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So I lied, there is a 4th tutor effect, but it costs 7 or 8 mana.
Right.
But that's a mana cost that I'm often willing to pay to get a shiny robot boy. Field of the Dead. We have 32 lands with different names.
Yeah.
So we're making good value off that.
Pretty good synergy there.
Yeah, no kidding. Whenever Field of the Dead or another land ETBs under your control, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, make a 2/2 zombie. That's easy peasy with this deck. No problem at all. We have Gyre Reach Sanitarium. Legendary land, you can pay 2 and tap. Each player draws a card, then discards a card. Not technically card advantage since you're breaking even, but it's just getting more cards into your hand. Glacial Chasm we alluded to. Mike, this is one of my favorite lands ever of all time.
Oh, it's very good.
It's another one of those spell lands because it doesn't make mana, but its effect is oh so powerful. So it's a land that has cumulative upkeep, pay 2 life, which means that the first turn after this comes out, you'll pay 2. After that, you'll pay 4, then 6 life, and it keeps increasing. When Glacial Chasm comes into play, sacrifice a land, which means it can't be the only land you have. You'll have to sacrifice it to itself. Creatures you control can't attack. Well, most of the time, that's not really a problem. If it is a problem, I'll sacrifice the land to its cumulative upkeep cost so I can swing with Emrakul. And then finally, we get to the benefit. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you.
Yeah, it's a pretty good benefit.
On a land. Yeah.
Yeah.
It needs 4 downsides, right? Doesn't make mana, drains your life, sack a land when it ATBs, creatures you control can't attack. That's 4 downsides. For the upside, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. That means this deck doesn't have a lot of creatures, Mike. It has 10, including Emrakul. Blocking is not a strong suit of this deck, and if Emrakul's not out, then it's going to be really difficult if somebody decides to go aggro on you, and that may be true for many non-creature decks. Glacial Chasm, this is one of my pet cards. I love it so much. How do you feel about it?
I'm a big fan of it. I think I didn't have any for a while because it wasn't like it wasn't a $1,700 card like Bazaar of Baghdad, but I do think
it's like a $2 card.
Yeah, I think there was a while there that it was more expensive than I was willing to pay for, and then I don't know if I just misunderstood or what happened, but it got considerably in my price range all at once and went, aha! I need several of these.
Well, there is a more expensive one. It's from the Vault Realms. Has a foil version that looks much nicer, and that one is more expensive. But the base version, which looks pretty ugly, it's from Cold Snap, but it's cheap. It's not expensive at all. And I basically introduced this card to our store's meta single-handedly. People loathe this card. Every aggro deck hates Glacial Chasm.
Oh, and that's because there are several decks that if you play that card and you have a way to mitigate, some of the cumulative upkeep, just okay, I cannot win. I cannot beat this card because I cannot do damage to you, and that's what I have to do, and I don't have a way to get rid of it. It's awesome.
You don't even need to mitigate the cumulative upkeep. And I hope you'll forgive the aside here, but the Command Zone had their stats episode, and they concluded that roughly half of all games end through combat damage.
Yep.
Which to me intuitively makes sense. That's almost certainly the most common way for a game to end.
Sure.
So right off the bat, you have a land that keeps you alive during 50% of all games.
Yeah.
Half of all games, you're the last player alive against the aggro deck. And they may not be able to win. But you said you need to mitigate the cumulative upkeep cost. You don't. Because let's add this up. The first turn after this comes out, the 0th turn after it comes out, it's nothing. So that's one turn where you can't be attacked. The second turn you pay 2 life. It's a total of 2 on 2 turns. The next you pay 4. That's 6 life across 3 turns. The next time you pay 6 life, that's 12 life across 4 turns. And the next turn you'll pay 8 life. That's 20 life across 5 turns. Let's say that's the most you're comfortably willing to pay is 20 life. So 5 turns, you have completely stalled out the aggro player for 5 turns at the cost of 20 life. They would have killed you. They wouldn't have dealt 20. You would be dead. So this land is keeping you alive, and that's really all I have to say about it. I love this land so much, Mike.
It's a great card.
Hall of the Bandit Lord. Hall of the Bandit Lord is a legendary land that comes into play tapped. You tap it and pay 3 life. Add 1 to your mana pool. If that mana is spent on a creature spell, that creature has haste. Now, red has this effect, and it's much better. But if we want haste, we're using Hall of the Bandit Lord. And if you'll recall, Emrakul has Flying, Trample, and Protection from Instant. How about Flying, Trample, Protection from Instant, and Haste?
Haste. Yeah.
That's scary.
Feels pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty great. And I'm willing to pay the 3 life. That's not an issue at all.
That makes sense.
This is a bit of an interesting one because you wouldn't expect to see it in this deck. But you have to read it very carefully here. This is Haven of the Spirit Dragon. Now, this is usually a deck that you would only see in a Dragon Tribal deck because it has tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, spend this mana only to cast a dragon creature spell, which I don't have any of. But it has this. Pay 2 tap and sack it, return target dragon creature card or Ugin Planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. And I have 2 Ugins in this deck.
Mm-hmm.
And those 2 Ugins are pretty powerful. We haven't talked about Ugin the Spirit Dragon, but I assume many of you are familiar with it. Ugin the Spirit Dragon has a -X loyalty ability. Exile each permanent with converted mana cost X or less that's 1 or more colors. And he enters with 7. So you can -7 him and exile every CMC 7 or less permanent on the battlefield that isn't yours and isn't an artifact. And then I can get him back. It's a valuable recursion effect. If you have a colorless deck that has an Ugin in it, I mean, usually we wouldn't encourage you, right, to run a card in your deck that only serves a couple of cards, but when you have this many utility land slots, you're able to go a little bit silly.
You can do it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, you can get into the weeds here. We talked about High Market. It's a great sack outlet.
Mm-hmm.
Homeward Path. Yes, Homeward Path. When you have a commander of this kind of nature, like Emrakul, where she's so powerful and so delicious that everybody just wants to touch her and steal her, and the blue player wants to take her and use her to their own devices. I don't really want that to happen because then I'm going to lose. So Homeward Path has an activated ability. Tap, each player gains control of all creatures they own, which is pretty nice. And it's not only for that situation. If you have an Insurrection, that's 0 mana. That's done. Not happening. Mob Rule, any effect that mind control, any blue aura that enchants a creature and steals it, any red effect that steals a creature. I mean, this comes up relatively often. People steal creatures, and this deck can't afford to lose its commander. If your deck cannot afford to lose its commander, you might want to consider running this one, just in case it gets stolen.
No, it's excellent card as far as, I mean, this deck knows the scariness that can be mind slaving and taking things that aren't yours. So the idea of, I should have something to prevent that totally makes sense.
Next one here is a artifact staple land here. We've Inventor's Fair. Inventor's Fair is a legendary land that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. Don't care about that. Tap and add a colorless. Don't care about that. Pay 4 and tap, sacrifice Inventor's Fair. Search your library for an artifact card, reveal it and put it into your hand. Shuffle your library, activate this ability only if you control 3 or more artifacts. This is great. This is just a great tutor effect for 5 mana. You do have to sack it, but I mean, when you need that mana rock, when you need that piece, you can get it. And I know that I continuously allude to finding the best cards in my deck. Often I don't. Often I'm not searching for my Geode Golem, just because I don't need to contest with anything. If somebody's getting way out ahead and I need to react to that, then yeah, I'll grab the big boy. But most of the time, I'll grab a Blink Mothern. I'll grab a Fonts of Mythos, something to draw me some cards, draw the table some cards. It's good stuff. Speaking of drawing cards, Mikokoro, Center of the Sea.
Yeah.
We talked about this card briefly in a previous episode. Legendary land. It has a mana ability, and it has pay 2 and tap it. Each player draws a card. I just love this land, Mike. What a great, just solid, stalwart land. I love it.
Yep.
Draws you a card, 2 mana. Draws the table card for 2 mana. It's like Temple Bell on a land.
Yeah, it's a safer Temple Bell with a little bit of investment required. Okay, fine.
We talked about Mirror in the Moaning Well. It's a sack outlet. How about Mishra's Workshop? This is another card I've proxied. Card is several $1,000s. This card is the reason why the vintage artifact deck is named Shops, right? Because Mishra's Workshop says tap, add 3 colorless to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast artifact spells. Oh no. Only artifact spells. Oh, that's only like 50% of my deck. What am I doing? Wow, yeah, this card's fantastic. It's off the rails. It's broken. Arguably, probably the single most powerful land in the entire deck.
Sure.
Proxy it though. You can't afford that one. Don't try to buy it. Rogue's Passage, which has the mana ability, and it has pay 4 and tap. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. Well, we talked about Manifold Key. This is on a land, and yes, it's usually going on Emrakul, but if somebody else, maybe a Geode Golem,
yeah,
maybe make Geode Golem unblockable.
That's a good way to see it.
Maybe if somebody else is trying to get combat damage through for a trigger, you can say, "Hey, I can force that to go through." That's a political deal right there.
It truly is. It's a hey, let's do something fun. Let's work together here.
We talked about Sanctum of Eternity, Bounce Your Commander, Sanctum of Ugin. It has a mana ability, and the other Ugin land. Whenever you cast a colorless spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, I wonder if we have any of those. You may sacrifice Sanctum of Ugin. If you do, search your library for a colorless creature card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your library. Hell yeah. I mean, you cast your commander and grab an Endbringer, draw some cards. I mean, yeah, there's only 10 creatures in the deck, but I usually know what I want to go for.
Yeah, there's very specific situations for each of them to excel in.
Absolutely. Scorched Ruins we talked about in a previous episode.
Yep.
And I won't harp on it too much because it's fantastic, and we did talk about it. When Scorched Ruins ETBs, sacrifice 2 lands, or you don't get it. And then it says tap, add 4 colorless. If you want to listen to me prattle on about this,
it's sure a very good card.
Knows the episode that we talked about it in. But wow, is this a good card? Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. This reminds me of another card. It has a mana ability and also has tap, add double colorless. Spend this mana only to cast colorless spells and only if you control 7 or more lands. This is like Temple of the False God, which I'm also running. And don't run that normally. Don't run Temple of the False God normally. Only in this deck, only in colorless decks. But this is like Temple of the False Gods without the downside, because it's never a dead land. You can
It's
always
never
tap
nothing.
it.
Yeah.
Right. But it also has a higher requirement. You have to have 6 other lands in play and this before you can use it. And then you can only use it on colorless spells. But you're only running this in a colorless deck, and all of my spells are colorless, so that's not a problem at all. Temple of the False Gods, add double colorless, only if you control 5 or more lands. We've talked about this. This card is not good in basically any deck, except in a colorless deck.
You were right at the beginning. This card is not good. Full stop. It's fine. It's okay.
It's usable in a colorless deck.
Usable,
Don't even try
yes.
it. Don't even try it in any other kind of deck.
Okay, I will accept that. Yes.
Okay. We have Thespian Stage and Vesuva, 2 copy lands. Thespian Stage has pay 2 and tap, and it becomes a copy of target land, and it has this ability. Whereas Vesuva enters the battlefield tapped as a copy of any land in play. I have a lot of good lands that I would want to make copies of, and
right.
Other people have good lands too, and make copies of those.
Lands are fun.
That's more the merrier. Throne of the High City. Talk about Monarch. Pay 4 tap and sacrifice it. You become the Monarch.
Always nice.
And that means you'll draw a card at the beginning of your end step. And whenever a player deals combat damage to you, they become the Monarch. So that's always good fun.
You have a glacial chasm, you'll always be the Monarch.
Yes, you will always be the Monarch. And that's drawing a card every turn. That's very nice. The final card that we'll talk about here is Maze of Ith. This is another spell.
Yeah!
And Maze of Ith has got to be one of my favorite pet lands. Wow, do I just love this card. It's a land with no mana ability, and it has tap, untap target attacking creature, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. It is so easy to completely spoil somebody else's plans. And if you have a creature deck and you're attacking and it turns into an unfavorable matchup, like they triple block you, you can just pull your creature back. You can say, no, it's not going to deal damage, it's not going to be dealt damage. And it's untapped.
Go home.
Go home. Mike, I get a feeling you're a fan of this card as well.
I love Maze of Ith. It's a... You know how we've talked about how if you have a counterspell in hand and everybody knows it, and they don't cast stuff, it means that the counterspell countered more than one spell without actually ever being cast? Maze of Ith is exactly like that. It will stop a whole bunch more than one creature attacking because it exists without actually having to do anything. It is one of those cards where the only way that I think I ever feel bad about it is if the rest of the table says, okay, we all have to collectively attack him and think this out and make him decide what thing he is going to stop, because we need that to be... And I love cards like that. Maze of Ith is awesome.
And if they don't do that, which they seldom do, it's exactly as you said. Just the threat of being able to turn a creature back is enough for that creature to never attack in the first place, which means that you got its effect for free without tapping it.
Right.
And that then discourages the next player from attacking you, because you'll just turn their creature back and the next player. And eventually, people just get it in their head that you're going to turn their creature back, and they stop attacking you.
Yep.
And you're right, unless they form a coalition and decide to wipe you off the face of the earth, which at that point I think your group hug strategy has failed.
Right.
It needs some more Garapororis in there. Then yeah, this land, it only stops one attacking creature in practice. It attacks much more than that. It's quite the land. And that leads directly into our next category here, which is Pillow Fort.
Yeah. You're talking about the fact that there's not a lot of creatures in this deck. It doesn't do a whole lot of blocking so much as, I guess, de-incentivize people from attacking you, more or less. So what are what are some of the ways that you're able to protect yourself playing this deck?
Sure. Well, as I alluded to earlier, I think the biggest threat to this deck, Mike, is your Vandal Blast. Effects like that. Board wipes that hit all artifacts or all non-land permanents are absolutely devastating to this deck. I mean, the deck doesn't have a lot of recursions, so something like that can just set me back to 0. So one of our big protective effects here, it's a classic Darksteel Forge.
Mm-hmm.
Darksteel Forge is a 9 mana artifact that says artifacts you control have indestructible. And that will protect basically all of my non-land permanents. It won't protect Emrakul, but that's okay.
I want to protect Emrakul. You want Emrakul to die and come back, yeah.
Right. As I'm quick to remind the table, if you destroy Emrakul, she will become more powerful than you could possibly imagine. And you don't want that to happen. So Darksteel Forge will protect all my ramp pieces and all that good stuff. It is 9 mana. It is a lot, so it's more of a mid to late game effect. But it's worth it. It's, I mean, you would play... Who's our mono white angel who protects? Goodness gracious, you know the one.
Avacyn.
Avacyn, thank you.
Sorry,
Avacyn,
you just said protects, and I went,
She protects, she attack,
kind?
and she burn the whole board. But mostly she protect. Yeah, this is your Avacyn right here.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic, and about the same mana cost too.
Yeah.
Our next Pillow Fort effect, we talked about Glacial Chasm, great effect. We talked about Homeward Path, Maze of Ith. How about an effect that you normally wouldn't think of as a Pillow Fort effect? How about Mycosynth Lattice?
Yeah.
So Mycosynth... Yeah, go for it.
I was in looking at the actual rundown of everything, I went, this, okay. I wasn't expecting it to be in that category, so I was kind of wondering, okay, talk to me, buddy. What's up here?
Well, we were just talking, Mike, about board wipes.
Uh-huh.
And particularly so your Vandal Blast and any other destroy non-land permanents, destroy artifacts. It's going to be so devastating to my deck that every other player is just going to kind of put up with it, right? It's like, okay, I'll lose 3 mana rocks, but Alex is going to lose the entire game, so it's fine.
Right.
They're a lot less likely to put up with it if this is in play. Let's read Mycosynth Lattice. All permanents are artifacts in addition to their other types. All cards that aren't on the battlefield, spells, and permanents are colorless, and players may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. Now that second ability, all permanents are colorless, don't really care about that. And players may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. That's just a nice little mana fix and group hug effect for the table. Help people out with their mana. But it's the first effect that we really care about. All permanents are artifacts in addition to their other types. That means if anybody gets it in their head that they want to blow up all artifacts, they're going to destroy literally every permanent on the board, including lands. So they're a lot less likely to want to do that, Mike. And that's why I have it in the Pillow Fort category.
Makes sense.
Does that make more sense?
Yeah, it's a you having your finger on the button.
Exactly.
And then you saying, you know what, fine, and walking away, and then putting their finger on the button and say, press it, I dare you.
Said, oh, you can press it, but we'll be here till 3 a.m. Yeah. Pretty fantastic effect. Really like that one. How about one that you really, maybe you haven't heard of this one, our dear listeners. How about Nullbrooch? Nullbrooch is a 4-mana artifact with the activated ability, pay 2 tap and discard your hand. Counter target non-creature spell. Now that's a pretty steep cost, right? Discard your hand. In blue and in green and in black, you'd be like, oh, discard your hand. That's one with nothing. I don't want to do that. Okay. So after you get past that pain point of discarding your hand, which, as I've alluded to several times, despite having 30 draw effects in the deck,
sometimes there's not a whole lot of cards.
I have 0 cards in hand or 1 or 2, so that's not even that bad. Ignoring that, how about this? The second time you activate it, you discard 0 cards because your hand is empty. And people know that you have it and that you're willing to discard your not hand to do it. So, just like having a counterspell up, this is a counterspell, it's going to counter more cards than it actually counters. And getting a counterspell in colorless is not easy. This is one of the very few that exist. We got this one, and then we got this next one here, Warping Whale. Nobody expects the Warping Whale, Mike.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Or the Warping Whale.
Or the Warping Whale.
1 in a colorless for an instance. Choose 1. First option, exile target creature with power or toughness 1 or less. I've used that before. Not all the time. Third option, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield with sacrifice this creature, add a colorless to your mana pool. Yeah, I've done that. Make an emergency blocker.
Make a screen.
Second option, counter target sorcery spell. Mike, what's the strongest sorcery spell in the entire game?
Oh boy, there's a bunch. Expropriate's a really gross one.
How about most board wipes?
You know what's a really bad one? I've heard Vandal Blast wouldn't do very good stuff for this deck.
Yeah. most board wipes that would really hamper this deck are at sorcery speed.
Yep.
Now, some of the best ones aren't, but most of them are. And most of the most powerful effects in the game, the ones that really swing, like Expropriate, like Insurrection, like all of those really, really powerful effects, those are sorceries. And being able to counter a sorcery for 2 mana in colorless is something that literally no one expects. When they see 2 islands held up, they're like, okay, we got a counterspell, we got to be aware of that. When they say 2 utility lands untapped, they're like, what are you going to do, counter my spell? Yeah, I think I will counter your spell.
Yes, I will.
I will. Yeah, fantastic. Nobody expects it. It's quite interesting. How about one of my favorite girls in the entire game? How about the Soul of New Phyrexia?
I got a couple of these because of you.
She is a glorious creature. 6 mana, artifact creature avatar. It's a 6/6 with trample. And she has 2 activated abilities. The first one, pay 5. Permanents you control gain indestructible until end of turn. I am 100% on board with paying 5 mana to do that.
Yep.
How about this one? People are sick of Soul of New Phyrexia. They blow up the board. Or they blow up Soul of New Phyrexia.
Yeah, they
Second
get rid
activated ability. They get rid of her. They don't like her. Pay 5. Exile Soul of New Phyrexia from your graveyard. Permanents you control gain indestructible until end of turn. She's the ace in the hole. Even if they blow her up, they always forget. Just wait 2, 3, 4, 5 turns. People completely forget that she's in your graveyard and she has an activated ability you can activate in your graveyard. They go to wipe your board and you say no. I love the Soul of New Phyrexia.
We've hit this point a couple of times, but in another category, having a counterspell and everybody knowing you have a counterspell counters more spells than the actual counterspell does. Having a Maze of Ith to stop something from attacking stops more things from attacking than the thing that you were actually going to expect to attack.
Exactly.
Having I will stop my stuff from being blown up on the board stops your board from being blown up more often than it would by itself.
And you need to make people aware
Yeah.
that you can do that. That's the power of those cards, is that they need to know that their efforts will be futile, and you need to tell them that, and then that may discourage them from even trying.
I love this card.
Speaking of Maze of Ith and cards like this, how about Thaumatic Compass?
Yeah.
This is another one of my all-time favorites. Thaumatic Compass is a 2 mana artifact. It's from Ixalan. It's a flip artifact. And on the front side, it has pay 3 and tap it. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. This is why I have a couple of basic land cards in my deck, just in case I'm missing my land drops and I have this kind of effect. It's just incidental. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you control 7 or more lands, transform Thaumatic Compass, which means we'll turn it over to its back face and it becomes Spires of Erazka, which is a land. And it has a mana ability to tap and add a colorless to your mana pool, and it also has an activated ability, tap and untap target, attacking creature an opponent controls, and remove it from combat.
Mm-hmm.
So Maze of Ith's main downside, right, is that it's a spell land. It doesn't have a mana ability, which means that if you need mana, it's often hurting you more than it's helping you, even though it's a great effect. But Thaumatic Compass, you got 7 or more lands in play, you flip it, it ramps you immediately because it itself taps for mana. But also, now you have a second copy of Maze of Ith. Mike, you know what's scarier than having one Maze of Ith? 2 Mazes of Iths.
That's fair.
Yes. I
get your Mirage
adore
Mirror
this
out.
card.
Get your Thespian stage out. Just have all of the Iths.
Oh my yes. Oh my yes. What a great card. Let's go to the last one I want to talk about in this category. Mm-hmm. And this is another bit of a sleeper. It actually got a reprint recently, but nobody really pays this card any mind, Mike. And that's Welding Jar. Welding Jar is a 0 mana artifact, which is always nice. And it has a single ability. Sacrifice Welding Jar, regenerate target artifact.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's really all you need to say. If somebody tries to spot remove something that's very important to you, say some kind of metalworker, you can just say, I'm going to regenerate it. And regenerate, as we've perhaps gone over in the past, is a replacement effect. We think of it as a shield. And that shield says, the next time that permanent would be destroyed this turn, instead tap that permanent. Pretty fantastic stuff.
It's helpful, to say the very least. It's I want to kill Wally, and Wally says no. There's too many ways to protect Wally.
This is just like you were saying. This is another one of your Nev's Disc, Maze of Ith.
Yep.
Counterspell ready. This is the threat that prevents the attack from happening.
Yep. I have to do that twice for it to happen once. So why even try? I'm already defeated. We've touched on some of the removal. The removal that you have in here is not a huge list. All is Dust.
Oh yes.
I think we're gonna call this the removal section, but we really just need to talk about All is Dust being awesome for a bit.
Dust. Now, it may sound like I have a bone to pick with the Command Zone. But when they said in their recent episode that All Is Dust isn't good enough anymore, I said, have you seen my deck? Yeah. Because in this deck, All Is Dust is a 7-mana tribal sorcery Eldrazi that says, each player sacrifices all colored permanents they control. Which means each player, who isn't me, sacrifices
a lot.
Everything they have except maybe their artifacts, and colored artifacts are getting pretty popular, so most of those too.
It's so good.
This is a completely one-sided board wipe, and it blows people out.
Well, and here's the other thing. There's a huge difference between destroy, bounce, exile, and sacrifice.
Yeah, sacrifice.
Let's talk about all of the cards that exist that stop people from making you sacrifice things.
I can think of 2.
I've got 1. So you go ahead.
I can think of my favorite such effect, and I believe it's one of your favorites as well. And that's Assault Suit.
Yep.
And
we're going to talk on that real hard.
We're going to talk on that. There's an angel.
Sigarda.
Sigarda, thank you.
That was the one that I had.
Perfect. So Sigarda prevents opponents from making you sacrifice things.
The end. That's the list.
We can't run Sigarda because Sigarda is in Selesnya, green and white.
Right.
Let's talk about Assault Suit.
Oh, Alex, what I'm saying is, All is Dust, being what it is, unless I'm misreading.
Oh, you can't stop it.
Yeah, there is one card in Magic other than Assault Suit which protects a thing. There is one card in Magic that says no to that effect.
It's brutal. There is
ridiculous.
one more. There is one more. And that's Teferi's Protection.
Oh, that's fair. Okay, fair enough.
Teferi's Protection, all permanents you control phase out. You have protection from everything. Your life total can't change. When permanents are phased out, you can't sacrifice them.
That's fair.
So it will protect you from all his deaths. But aside from that, basically you got counter spells. That's all you can do.
Yeah, you stop the spell, not the effect.
I don't care if your permanents are indestructible. I don't care if your permanents have hexproof. I don't care if they have protection from colorless. It doesn't matter. They're going to the graveyard.
You're going to put them there, not me.
Mm-hmm. You will sacrifice everything you have. All is Dust is a brutal spell in any colorless deck. And as far as I'm concerned, it's mandatory.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can talk about the cards that aren't good enough anymore episode if need be. But I think you and I were on the same page for a lot of what they were saying.
Yeah. We talked briefly about Ugin the Spirit Dragon. We talked about his -X. He also has a couple of other abilities, but the -X is the big one, which again, you'll exile all permanents CMC extraless with one or more mana colors, which is great. But he also has a +2, which is that Ugin the Spirit Dragon deals 3 damage to target creature or player. That's fine. He also has a -10, which is you gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, put 7 permanents from your hand onto the battlefield. I don't really use the +2 or the -10 very much. I'll use it as an all is dust, basically.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah. And it's a great all is dust because you can grab it with Planar Bridge. Yeah.
Always nice.
Always nice. Yeah, we basically talked about, I only have 4 removal effects. I have All is Dust, I have Blast Zone, the land, and I have the 2 Ugins, Old Ugin and Nugan. And Warping Whale can exile a CM power or toughness 1 creature. Yeah, there's not a lot of removal that I'm running in colorless, and that's more of a larger theme across my group hug decks. I typically tend to not run a large amount of removal, but in colorless especially, options are quite thin. There's Not of This World, which is a 7 mana exile target permanent, right? That's the kind of thing we were talking about at the start, right? It's too expensive.
Right.
I'm not itching to run a 7 mana remove target. There's nothing that I can think of that would be that scary. Like, even a Blood Moon, what's it going to do? Turn all my utility lands off? I can still cast all my spells.
Yeah. No, that's fair. It also feels... It might sound weird, but it almost feels counterintuitive to say, okay, I'm going to give everybody extra resources and extra cards and all of these things because I'm going to benefit the most out of them, and then put cards, more cards in your deck than not that are, oh, I'm going to remove these threats all the time, or I'm going to stop people from doing things when I am also enabling them to do things more than they normally would. So I've noticed that, especially in my group hug decks as well, I don't have a ton of targeted removal or even just like across the board removal.
That is the thing, though, with a group hug deck. A lot of it is the carrot, and part of it is the stick.
Yeah,
you need to have the carrot because that's group hug. That's the good stuff.
Right.
But you need to have the stick because not everybody wants the carrot. Or they don't think they want the carrot. They don't.
Sure.
They're like,
I'm not hungry.
I don't want that stuff. You're a group hug deck, and you can say, "Hey, if you don't want that, I got something else for you." And they'll say, "Okay, I'll take the carrot."
That makes sense.
It really helps push the donkey in one direction. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Control the game. So that's really all I have for removal. I don't run a lot of it. What's I think we can parlay here into what we were just talking about, and that's our group hug section, which we've talked about most of the cards in the group hug section, like Blink Mothern, but we haven't talked about Assault Suit. And Assault Suit is just so special in this deck. First of all, because it's an equipment.
Yep.
And it's not a normal equipment like a sword, where like you can imagine Emrakul holding a tiny sword, which is just fantastic. But this is even better because it's a mech. So you just imagine like trying to squeeze a creature the size of a city into a mech suit. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a mech the size of a city, and like that makes it even scarier. I don't know how you're imagining it. Maybe one tentacle goes into the mech. I don't know. And she'll like puppeteer it.
I was thinking of like magic items in D&D where, you know what, it you attune to it. It grows a little bit. It fits you now. It's fine.
She'll possess it.
Yeah.
So Assault Suit is a 4-mana equipment that says equipped creature has +2/+2 and haste, and it can't attack you or a planeswalker you control, and it can't be sacrificed. Mm-hmm. Now this is very important because of the next ability, which says, at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you may have that player gain control of equipped creature until end of turn if you do untap it, and it has equip 3. So that recontextualizes the first part, right? Because why would you be worried about like can't be sacrificed or can't attack you? It's because you're passing it around, and I'm not necessarily sure what Mike uses this card for. I think he uses it in quite a similar way to I do, and perhaps in his Ruhan deck. But in this deck, 13/13, it becomes a 15/15 beater with flying and trample and haste and protection from instants, and can't be sacrificed and can't attack me or my Ugins. And as your opponent's turn start, you say, hey, if I were to give you a 15/15 Flample Tentacle Girl, would you be willing to smack somebody in the face with it? And most of the time they say, hell yeah.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'm in. Let's do this.
And with that, I can very quickly win the game with commander damage, which is the main goal of the deck. So, Mike, tell me what you like about Assault Suit.
Okay. So we talked about this a little bit in our off time here. Assault Suit, the more I think about it, it's not my favorite card in Magic. But it is probably in like my top 5, top 3, just because of what you've already said. I love the idea of, I'm going to take my cool commander, I'm going to put it in this cool robot suit, and I am going to pass it around the board.
It's so much fun.
This is my favorite card, especially in the Ruhan deck, because nothing makes me happier than, you know what is really fun for me to do? Roll a die and see who Ruhan's going to attack. You know what's more fun? Everybody getting to do that. Everybody. You get a Ruhan. You get a Ruhan. Everybody. I love Assault Suit. It is as far as I'm concerned, it is the most group hug equipment that could be, because it's literally, want to be friends? Okay. Here is a
it's
mech
up
daddy.
There. There's Dowsing Dagger too.
I know, but it's just so fun to give somebody a commander for a bit.
Yeah. And the more powerful your commander is, the splashier your commander is.
Yeah.
Like Ruhan's a 7/7. Emrakul's a 13/13. If you have a big splashy commander and your primary goal is to win through commander damage,
swing
maybe
it
you're a
out.
Voltron deck. Yeah. Assault Suit is one of your best options.
Yeah.
Because the commander damage rule tracks your commander. It doesn't track who's dealing the commander damage. If I pass it to Mike and Mike swings at Jamie and deals 13 to her, and then on my turn I deal 13 to Jamie, that's 26 and she's out.
Sorry, Jamie.
Sorry.
I really
I'm not that sorry though.
I really like the Assault Suit. I couldn't help it.
Oh, it's great. It's great. It's just great. Fantastic card. One of our next cards that we didn't touch on. This is another great group hug effect. Otherworld Atlas.
Mm-hmm.
This is a 4-mana artifact with tap, put a charge counter on Otherworld Atlas, and then a second ability, tap. Each player draws a card for each charge counter in Otherworld Atlas. So typically when I'm using this one, I'll build it up to 2. Mm-hmm. That's typically where I'll put it. I'll bring it out, I'll tap it that turn. The next turn I'll tap it again. Then the third turn I'll have everybody draw 2. And I have enough artifact on tap effects that 2 is very nice.
Sure.
And that's a powerful draw effect. That's the kind of power I want in this deck, and gives cards to the table. It's like a Temple Bell, but it's a little bit powered up, right?
Yeah.
Higher mana cost.
It takes a little bit more effort, but it can be a much heavier effect pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And we talked about all of these. How about Howling Mine, the first group hug card ever printed?
Yeah.
Howling Mine's a 2-mana artifact. It says at the beginning of each player's draw step, if Howling Mine is untapped, that player draws an additional card.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's there to be said? This is like an old friend.
It's the mainstay.
Howling Mine is just fantastic. Everybody loves a good Howling Mine.
It's another one of those cards that when it hits the table, it doesn't get the even if people know what your deck is trying to do, even if it's like we're gonna he's gonna get so many cards and then he's gonna do the stuff, we've seen this 1,000 times. I've never heard a groan at Howling Mine. I just haven't.
That's the great thing about Group Hug is, yes, everybody knows the game. Everyone knows the gambit. They know that later in the game you're going to go for the throat, because every deck goes for the throat. That's how you win. But until we get there, we're having a good time, and we're making sure that your deck is finding the cards you need to make your deck work. Mm-hmm. And maybe you'll find the cards you need to stop my deck from working. Who knows? But that's really part of the fun. When you have a commander this powerful, like Emrakul, this scary, mm-hmm. tempering her with a bunch of group hug effects is, I think, a really positive thing. And it really sort of defangs the deck, even though it is still quite a powerful deck.
It's extremely powerful, but as much as it's powerful because the commander is something that can do some really, really terrible things to people, mm-hmm. it's a really fun deck to play against. Even though it's... So people that like horror movies and people that like playing like the psychological thriller kind of video games and stuff, mm-hmm. it feels like that effect when you're playing against this deck. Because there is this imminent dread that something terrible could happen. That Jason is going to bust through the door and come after you.
Who's the monster going to get next?
Right. But sometimes Jason busts through the door and then he gives you a cupcake because everything's okay. And
that's the scariest of all.
And that's where you go, I'm uncomfortable, but I will eat this. Thank you.
I'll take the cupcake.
Please don't hurt me. I really like this deck, and So here's the last thing I want to know then. How we've talked about mind slavery, we talked about how mind slaver works. Mm-hmm. Give me what happens when somebody else controls your turn? How does that work from the judge's perspective? And I guess this is us actually transitioning into, judge's corner. You know how Mindslaver works because of this deck. You also know because of Judge. So what are some of the weird interactions and how does Mindslaver actually work?
Sure. So when we're talking about controlling another player, which is the formal term for Mindslaver, you're going to make all choices and decisions that the controlled player is allowed to make or is told to make. So we've alluded to that directly with the commander, right? We have 2 rules that affect how a commander moves between zones. The first one is a state-based action. When a commander is in a graveyard or in exile and has entered that zone since the last time that state-based actions were checked, then its owner may choose to move it to the command zone. And then the second one is if a commander would enter a hand or a library, instead its owner may put it in the command zone. That's a replacement effect. Now, both of those are decisions. And the Mindslaver, the puppet master controlling another player, makes those decisions. I choose if you put your commander in the command zone. I choose if you put your commander in exile. And that's a very powerful effect. This includes choices about what to play, decisions and modes for spells and abilities. It's how you use your resources, what abilities you activate for mana, how you pay costs, how many times you activate an ability. And there are really only there are two limits on what you can do. And basically, if it isn't one of these two things, the sky's the limit. You can do anything. You can't concede.
Right.
on behalf of that player. Right? You can't call for a judge on behalf of that player. You can't do anything. You can't offer a draw on behalf of that player. You can't do anything that would be a outside the game action like that. You can't do that. Be a little bit too easy, right?
Right. Everything has to be confined to the resources and decisions that you can make with those resources and the actual board state as a whole.
The second thing, and this doesn't really come into play in Commander very much, but you can't look at cards that player owns outside of the game.
Okay.
So in a competitive setting, that would be the sideboard. You cannot look at a player's sideboard. Commander doesn't really have sideboards, but we do have companions.
Yes.
So if a player has a companion outside the game, and for some reason you can't see it, I don't really know what situation that would happen in, but you wouldn't be able to see it. Now, when I say outside the game, I'm not talking about exile, because exile is a zone within the game. So if a player has, for example, cards that are face down on the battlefield or face down in exile, you as the player controlling that player are allowed to look at those cards at any time, as that player would be allowed to. Now, one little fun piece of trivia that we brought up in our in another episode, or we will bring up depending on when this episode is released, is that if you're playing in, for example, a commander variant or a game variant where there is more than one player on a team, we're talking about two-headed giant or archenemy, something of that nature. If you gain control of another player, you will gain control of that entire team.
Got it.
And that's pretty nasty. I've definitely done that one before.
Yeah, that's rough.
We can briefly here talk about some of the choices that you can make as a result of controlling a player. So we've talked about what you can do with their commander. We're pretty comfortable on that. You can use a tutor effect or a fetch effect that player controls. You can use fetch a land or any non-black tutor. Any tutor that says search for a type of card, like mystical tutor, find a instant or sorcery, or worldly tutor, find a creature, right? Any tutor effect or fetch effect, find a certain type of land. If you use that effect and you control that player, and therefore you always have the option to fail to find. Because it is always theoretically possible that there is no card that fulfills that requirement left in the zone. It's a hidden zone, so it's possible that you would fail to find it.
Search your land for a basic. Oh, well, I don't have any basics left, so I guess nothing happens.
Exactly. Even if there are actually basics left in the library, you can still choose not to find one. That's always permitted. And that's permitted even if you're not being mind-slaved. If you don't want to find a card from a tutor, you can say, I can't find it.
Sure.
And that's not against the rules. That's not lying. You're allowed to do that because it's a hidden zone. Mm-hmm. Our next option involves modal spells and spells with choices. So maybe you have an X spell where you choose the value of X. Mm-hmm. On many of those spells, X can be 0. If it doesn't say that X can't be 0, X can be 0. Right. And that effectively will usually waste that spell, which is really nasty. But there's other options as well. When we talk about Phyrexian mana, we talk about when you cast that spell, you'll choose whether you want to spend mana or life
Sure.
for each of those Phyrexian pips, and naturally you would choose life and drain that player for a bit of life. This also goes for any different modes on a spell, like choose one or more. You can of course choose any of those modes and do what you will. You can counterspell that player's own spells.
Yep.
If you put a spell in the stack, they have a counterspell in hand, hold priority, counter that spell. You can of course choose to do that. These things may seem trivially true and obvious, but it's worth reminding you that you're allowed to sabotage yourself, and thus a player controlling you is allowed to sabotage you.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Sabotage they will. You can also target your own permanents and sacrifice your own permanents. If the player you're controlling has a sacrifice outlet, you can choose to sacrifice any number of legal permanents to it, and that just gets really nasty.
There was a time
If they have...
There was a time
Yeah.
we were sitting at the table and you took over somebody's turn because I don't even remember what deck they were playing, but it was not a friendly one. And you mindslavered them, I think, on turn 4, or right before it was going to turn into their turn 5. And you looked at their hand and found a Pact of Negation in it.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's just he's going to win next turn if we don't stop him. Can somebody cast a spell so I can counter it and get him out of the game? Like, I path to exile my veteran explorer? No, Pact of Negation. Cool. All right, you can have your turn now. And then he took his turn.
Good luck spending 5 mana you don't have next turn.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, that's really, really rough. And then I think he said, well, I mean, that's fair. Here's my hand. And I went, oh, ah, ah.
I remember exactly which deck that was, Mike. That was a Jin-Gitaxias deck.
Oh, that's right. It was one of those, he sat down and I went, oh, no.
It's just a Jin-Gitaxias deck, and I said, no. There's no
is
such
ever
thing
on
as
that.
just a Jin-Gitaxias deck.
No, it's okay. It's a group hug Jin-Gitaxias deck.
Jin-Gitaxias is a Praetor, I think it's 7 blue, for a legendary creature Praetor that says, at the beginning of your end step, draw 7 cards, you have no maximum hand size, and each opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7.
Yup.
Which means that unless you have an effect that increases your hand size, like Reliquary Tower, then your hand size is going to be 0. Which means at the end of your turn, you'll discard your hand.
Yep.
And that's not fun. Nobody likes that.
It's not great. So when you're worried about, oh man, I don't know if I like this Emrakul group hug thing.
Remember that Jin-Gitaxias decks exist.
Yep. So don't worry. Everything is some form of terrible all the time.
So one last point before we wrap up here. We talked briefly about how Emrakul wins. She wins by swinging through.
Yeah.
What if Emrakul doesn't swing through? Right? What if she gets exiled and stolen and I can't use her anymore? What if they have a glacial chasm?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. What then? Well, we're gonna probably have to wait for the glacial chasm to run out, and during that time they can do a lot of stuff to Emrakul.
Sure.
So we need to have another option, and that option is Mirror Incubator, which we talked about.
Yeah.
Or we will talk about, depending on which episode is released first. Mirror Incubator is a deliciously janky win con for this deck, and it's a 6-mana artifact that has an activated ability. Pay 6 and tap it and sacrifice it. Search your library for any number of artifact cards, exile them, and then put that many 1/1 mirror artifact creature tokens onto the battlefield. So, yeah, at the point that I'm casting this in the game, I'm starting out with about 50 to 60 artifacts in the deck. At this point, there's probably 30 to 40 artifacts left in the deck. So, for 12 mana, I'm making anywhere between 20 and 40 creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we talked about this is kind of a Hail Mary, right? But I'm not normally using this. This is the last resort.
Sure.
And that's important for your deck to have a last resort, right? Because if Emrakul gets locked down, if she gets imprisoned in the moon, which is by far the most flavorful way to lock down an Emrakul, which is 2 and a blue for enchant target creature, planeswalker, or land, and
Right.
that enchanted permanent is a colorless land with tap at a colorless mana. And of course, in the story, the way that Emrakul ends up being quote unquote defeated is that she possesses Tameo and imprisons herself in the Moon of Innistrad,
Mm-hmm.
which is the creepiest note of all, right? What's she
Oh,
doing
yeah.
up there? Yeah, why does she want to be in the moon?
Yeah. What you doing up there, buddy?
Yeah. So that's the Emrakul deck, Mike. This deck is average CMC 3.61.
Which is
Pretty lean.
surprising.
Surprisingly lean.
Yeah.
Considering there's a 13 CMC card in it, but that's only one card.
Well, but
100%
considering
of the cards are colorless.
a 13, CMC commander, and then the Ugins and the Darksteel Forge, like there's a lot of really heavy-handed CMCs. But
Oh, yeah.
like you said, there's a whole bunch of real cheap
Zeros and
artifacts
ones.
and zeros, and yep. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm looking at the curve right now. It goes up to 4, and it gets pretty up there in 4. We have 15 that are at 4. We have 13 at 3, 12 at 2, and at 1 and 0 we have 8. But once we get past 4, it's really fallen off. At 5, we only have 6 cards CMC 5, 6 cards CMC 6. 7, 8, and 9, we only have 1 each. And of course, 13, we have 1. So when we talk about, balancing your mana curve, and you might hear other content creators saying you shouldn't run, that many effects that are 7 mana or above, you can still run those effects, and I do. I have 4 of them. And that doesn't make my deck any less fun to restrict myself. And as you can see, we have these expensive effects, but the deck is still sub 4 CMC, which is quite lean for a deck like this. Mike, how do you feel about this deck overall?
Again, it is a terrifying adventure that is both thrilling and disconcerting at just about all times.
Its enigma is vexing as life itself.
Yep. Yeah. No, that actually that suits it. I like playing with it. I like when we sit down and this is a card, or this is the deck that you bring out, because I know.
Right.
Again, my favorite thing about this deck is the amount of ambiguity it has. It's not a deck where, even though there are, a couple of tutors in there and there are a couple of cards in there, it is there are 15 different ways that I'm going to try and do something. And then I'm going to try and take somebody's turn. And when I take their turn, I'm going to try and do a bunch of different stuff with their turn. There is no blueprint that you follow every time, other than, well, I want to cast my commander. And that's most decks. So the amount of games that I've played with this that aren't repeat performances, I really liked this deck, and I'm really glad that you were able to share it with everybody.
I'm really happy to be able to share it with people. I'm proud to say this is a very unique deck. People don't make Emrakul group hug decks. People don't really make colorless group hug decks, but there are some of them. If you're looking to build this deck, please proxy it. The price tag on this is about $3,000 to $7,000.
Yeah, it's
I
a
didn't
chunk
spend
of change.
that much. I did not spend that much.
Sure.
I proxied Mishra's. I proxied Bazaar. I proxied Ugin, and many of the rest of them, like Mox Opal and Mana Crypts, those are judge promos, so I didn't pay for them.
Right.
And the commander herself is not cheap either. It's a $40 commander.
Yeah.
So please proxy. Do not spend $7,000 on this deck. And we're going to go ahead and make sure that deck is linked in the show notes for you all to check it out.
We'll put the tapped out in there so everybody can take a look and get an idea and make their own, make something similar. And feel free to comment.
And have fun with the promised hugs. Mike, thank you for letting me share this deck with you and the listeners.
Absolutely, Alex. That'll do it for us this week, everyone. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe and rate the podcast. If you have any questions or comments for us, follow us on Twitter at EDH_social, or email us at thesocialcontractedh@gmail.com. Until then, I say get all of the spikes out of your life. Start hanging with the group hug Johnnies, okay? Talk to you next week.